the church would really love it if you could come down and, you know, take the leadership, take the reins of the church. And I just didn't feel compelled to do that. So then we began to kind of meditate on the idea of church planting, and hadn't really talked to anyone about this. It was very fearful for both of us to think of doing this. And so Darren and I connected, and we said, hey, let's grab lunch together. And so he and I met in Kirkland at Mediterranean Kitchen, and I tell him, like, we're catching up on life, and I tell him, like, this is crazy. I've never thought of doing this before, but Lindsay and I, my wife Lindsay and I, we have been thinking about the possibility of church planting, because I knew that Darren wanted to plant another church out of Imprint. And he goes, you know what's crazy? I just drove home from Portland yesterday after talking with his mentor, Guy Gray, about the future of Imprint Church. He was looking to hire a part-time worship leader to help him out on Sunday so he didn't have to do the double duty thing, you know, and he thought, he goes down with a job description that he had written up to show his mentor Guy and says, hey, what do you think of this job description? He was very proud of it. And Guy said something to the effect of, this is the dumbest thing I've seen. This is garbage. And he was hurt. He was actually hurt and offended. Like, what do you mean? I spent some time thinking about... And so Guy says to him, well, don't you want to be a church planting church? And he says, yeah. And he goes, well, how is this furthering your vision of becoming a church planting church? To fill a guy part-time role. He goes, what I think you should do is hire a full-time pastor that you can hand some responsibilities to. He can preach with you, for you. He can help lead worship, and then you train him up and you send him out. So then when I tell Darren at Mediterranean Kitchen over lunch that this thing that I haven't shared with anyone, he says, I drove up from Portland yesterday thinking, you know what, I think I need to hire Tom Regan to be our first church planter. And we kind of had this like, aha, like holy moment, like maybe God's doing something here. So then the next few months, I went through church planting assessments, my wife and I did, and at the end of that process, I was kind of given a green light by Converge. You know, Ken was part of Converge denomination. They gave us a green light toward church planting, and so I began to have more conversations with Darren and the elder board just about the possibility of me coming and being the first church planter. And ultimately, we ended up moving over from North Shore to Imprint Church in the spring of 2015, so almost 10 years ago. And we were very excited, and very intimidated, but very excited. And I'll try to make this part of the story fast because I can sometimes slow down unintentionally to tell this part of the story, so I'll just have to zip through it. 2 months in, we're excited to be there, and I had been having these like moments in my mind where it wasn't like a stroke, but it would have these kind of like these blank out moments in my brain when I couldn't really speak, and I didn't really tell anyone about it. If it was happening to me, you wouldn't know that it was happening to me. And one Sunday I'm leading worship at Imprint, and at the very end of the service, I collapse on top of my guitar and have a grand mal seizure in front of the entire church. And I wake up in an ambulance with my wife next to me, and they do a scan on me in the ER, and they find a golf ball-sized cancerous brain tumor right here. That's why I have the marks on my head. And Darren was there, and we wept together when we got the news, because the first thing I thought about was my girls. And so we're like, maybe church planting's not happening. I don't even know if I'm going to be alive. And so we kind of pressed pause, and the elders were very gracious to me, and I worked for the first 6 to 8 months I was there. I was able to work, I think I worked a couple of those months, and they finally said, I had surgery, by the way, sorry, I should skip ahead. I had surgery that week, and my first surgery, and took out as much of the brain tumor as they could, about maybe 90–95% of it. And the elders said to me, why don't you just take a break, and we'll find out if you need more treatment. We'll just try to figure it out. So here I am. Not everyone knows me. Darren knows me well, but not everyone in the church knows me well. And they treat me like family and pay my salary even when I'm not working. So this generosity thing is real. It's like not an aspirational value, it's an actual value. And God was very kind to me through the leadership of Imprint and through Darren. And 5 months later, I had a second surgery down at MD Anderson in Texas to remove what they could, and they tried to get most of it, but some of it was on critical brain tissue. So then about 6 months later, I ended up going through 6 rounds of oral chemo over 6 months and 6 weeks of brain radiation. And we just pressed pause on church planting. And Darren was like, you don't need to church plant. We work well together here. I remember him saying this, you could have a fulfilling career as a pastor. We work well together. You could have a fulfilling career here. We kind of pastor the church together. And let's just hit pause and just see what the Lord does. And He'll make His timing clear. And so after about 1.5 years, we go through this process of kind of reevaluation and prayer and talking with people that we trust. And we really talked to my doctor, and she says, well, your brain, there's always a possibility that brain cancer can come back, but from what I can see, your radiation's done, you've done really well. Your brain, other than the possibility of it coming back, your functioning is intact by God's grace. I have no deficits. And you might live a long, fulfilled life and die of something completely different. And we thought, well, I don't think we should say no to church planting just because of the possibility that this could come back. So kind of together and collectively we decided we're going to go for it. So at the beginning of 2017, we kind of started to assemble a team from Imprint Church. Some of these guys, like Ben over here and Kurt, had come with our family from North Shore with the intention of planting a church with us. And so we put a team together in 2017, and then in early 2018, in February of 2018, so 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, we took a group of about 60 adults and 40 kids, so slightly bigger than the original Imprint Church plant. And we planted Imprint Church in Bothell. Now let me back up just a little bit and tell you, as Darren said, there was never an intention to plant another Imprint Church. The idea was I would just go out and do what Darren did and plant a new church. But here's what I discovered in the church planting process. When I met with another church planter who had planted and by all appearance had a successful church plant, lots of people coming, and I asked him, like, hey, do you have any advice for me? And one of the things that he said was, you need to figure out what's going to set you apart as a unique church. And figure that out and kind of ride that wave, so to speak. And I drove away from that meeting going, I love what we're doing at Imprint Church. I love Darren. The Lord has allowed me to help build the culture and Imprint Church, and I want to replicate that. If I'm going to plant a church, I want to plant a church that's just like Imprint Church. And so we kind of conceived of this idea that at the time we thought was really novel and unique, like a family of churches, and we realized a bunch of other churches do this too. So, and we planted another Imprint Church, and so we share one elder team, we share one common budget, ministry philosophy, doctrine. Some of the ministries are localized to the location, and some of them are centralized, like small groups kind of go across the board. And you can talk about that more in a little bit, probably, Tom. And so we planted in 2018. We started in the North Shore Senior Center in downtown Bothell, kind of outgrew the little space that we were in there, moved across the street to the bigger multi-purpose room. All along wanting to get on to Cascadia Community College because I did 8 years of college ministry. We thought, man, there's a really cool lecture hall, Mobius Hall that we could meet in there. God finally gave us that spot right when we kind of needed the space because the church was growing. We were outgrowing our kids ministry space, really. And so we moved in there in 2019, very excited to be on campus. We're seeing college students coming to church, very excited about that. And then we were only there for 6 months before March of 2020 hit, and we got booted from the campus. And as Tom alluded to earlier, we thought we were just going to be gone. We're like, oh my gosh, we can't have church here for 3 weeks? What are we going to do? And 3 weeks turned into 3 years of looking for a spot. So what we did was we recombined Imprint Bothell congregation with Imprint Woodinville congregation in Woodinville because we have a space there. And so for 3 years we were doing ministry and worshiping together, and Darren and I were alternating and taking turns preaching, and the church was getting bigger and filled back up to the point where we're like, we got to do something here. So the option was before us. Lord, do you want another Imprint? Do you want Imprint Bothell to be a thing? Or do you want us to combine and to just have one Imprint church in Woodinville? And we felt like our commitment and DNA to medium-sized churches and planting churches, that was still there. And so to stay combined and have one bigger church in Woodinville didn't fit the vision of medium-sized churches and church planting. So by God's great grace, He gave us a space. Literally, it took me 10 minutes to get here. It's just on Filbert Road up by Thrasher's Corner in Bothell. And so there was another church that had owned that building and had not been meeting for a while since COVID started, and we were just ecstatic, very excited to even have a building to rent. And we were renting, but what happened with Story Church is that their pastor resigned. He didn't want to pastor anymore, and they had to dissolve the church after paying off their mortgage, and then they gifted Imprint Church the building. So we were gifted a $4 million property in Bothell. So I think that God put His stamp and said, yes, I want Imprint Church to be a thing in Bothell, and doubly so, in that He handed the church to us. So we're just super grateful to be a part of what God's doing. We're not out to build an Imprint kingdom. I know we're having conversations here. We're not out to build an Imprint kingdom. We're out to be a part of what God's doing to build His church for the sake of the kingdom. Not our kingdom, but His. So.
That Bothell facility is less than a half a mile from our home. So, just so you know, okay?
Yes, we're grateful for Story Church.
Which, by the way, feels a world away from here and feels a world away from Woodinville. They feel differently in terms of the culture of the area. So geographically, yeah.
Yeah, so to carry the story forward, Crystal and I accepted a role at Imprint in March of 2020, finally moved up in May of 2020, and it was perfect. We were coming from a very Central City Urban Core megachurch in Portland that started out as a very small church plant when we joined it. And coming into a medium-sized suburban church. And so it was going to be a steep learning curve, but because nobody else knew what was going on, we fit right in. And so it wasn't quite the same learning curve that we had anticipated. To go back so I can move the story forward, part of my story is that I was raised in the city for the first half of my childhood and then moved to the country